sun filtered through the linen curtains, casting a soft glow across the marble counter where Elena Monroe sat in silence. The aroma of toasted bread and scrambled eggs filled the air, but it did little to ease the tension that had crept into their kitchen like an unwanted guest. Ryan sat across from her, scrolling absently on his phone, the occasional tap of his thumb on the screen the only sound between them. His coffee sat untouched. Elena watched him quietly, her spoon hovering above her oatmeal. "You barely slept last night," she said softly, not accusing, just observing. Ryan looked up for a moment, expression unreadable, then shrugged. "Busy week ahead," he murmured, then returned to his screen. No warmth, no curiosity about her own week. The conversation ended before it began. Elena's fingers tightened around her spoon. The gap between them wasn't measured in miles. It was in moments like these. Invisible, yet loud. She stared at the man she had once built dreams with, vacations, children growing old together. Now the only thing growing was the silence. She tried again. "I was thinking we could have dinner out on Friday. That place you used to love in Lincoln Square?" Ryan didn't look up. "Let's see how the week goes," he said flatly. No smile, no acknowledgement. Her chest tightened. She sipped her tea, trying to swallow the lump forming in her throat. They had been married for nearly 8 years. This wasn't a storm. This was erosion, slow and quiet. And what hurt the most wasn't what he said. It was everything he didn't. Elena sat at the edge of the dining table, her fork tracing circles in the untouched risotto she had made from scratch. The clock ticked toward 9 p.m., and still, Ryan hadn't come home. She had lit the candles at 7, poured his favorite red wine, and changed into a soft navy dress he once said brought out the color in her eyes. But all of it sat untouched, like her. The silence in the room felt cavernous. She reached for her phone for the 6th time and typed a message. "Dinner's ready. Everything okay?" She stared at it, then deleted it. She didn't want to seem needy. Instead, she leaned back and stared at the single plate of food she had set out for him, waiting, as she always did, for a man who had stopped arriving long ago. When Ryan finally walked through the door at 10:26 p.m., he didn't offer an apology. "Got caught up at the office," he muttered, tossing his keys onto the console. Elena turned from the hallway and looked at him. "You could have texted," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably strained. He rubbed his temples. "Elena, not tonight. I'm exhausted." She followed him into the kitchen, her arms folded. "You've been exhausted every night lately." Ryan opened the fridge, took a bottle of water, and looked at her for a brief moment, like she was a stranger blocking his path. "You always find a way to make things dramatic." The words stung, sharp and quick. Elena didn't reply. She simply watched him walk upstairs, his footsteps fading like the warmth between them. Later that night, she sat on the couch, scrolling through old pictures on her phone, photos from happier times, both of them smiling, unaware of how far they'd fall. Elena wasn't expecting the knock on the door that rainy afternoon, and certainly not the familiar figure standing on the porch with her luggage in tow. Sophie Adams, her best friend since childhood, the girl who once shared secrets under the stars with her, stood smiling beneath a beige umbrella, her curls bouncing as she waved. "Surprise! I'm in town for a while," Sophie said cheerfully. Elena, stunned but polite, stepped aside to let her in. "Wow, you look the same," Sophie laughed, glancing around the home. "Except this house. God, Elena. It's beautiful. You're living the dream, huh?" Elena smiled thinly. Something felt off. Not in Sophie's tone, but in the way she kept glancing around as if evaluating the space. Ryan came downstairs minutes later, freshly showered and in casual clothes. His eyes lit up the moment he saw Sophie. "Look who's here," he said, grinning more genuinely than he had in weeks. He moved in for a hug, holding Sophie a second longer than Elena thought necessary. "What are you doing in town?" Ryan asked, his voice suddenly animated. "Just wanted a change of scenery," Sophie said breezily. "And maybe spend time with my favorite couple." Ryan turned to Elena. "She should stay here a few nights. We've got the guest room, right?" Elena blinked. "Of course," she said, forcing warmth into her voice. But inside, something twisted. She had spent months trying to pull her husband closer, and in a single hug, Sophie had managed to break through a wall she couldn't. That night, as the two of them laughed over old stories in the living room, Elena quietly slipped away to bed. Her own laughter had stopped coming long ago. By the third day, Sophie had seamlessly woven herself into the fabric of their home. She brewed Ryan's coffee just the way he liked it, 2 sugars, no cream, and remembered it faster than Elena ever could. She laughed at all his jokes, even the dry ones, and often stood beside him while Elena cooked, commenting with amusement on their dynamic. "You know, Elena," Sophie said one afternoon as the 3 of them sat in the garden, "Ryan works so hard. He looks so stressed lately. You really should give him some space. Let him unwind." Elena turned toward her slowly, eyebrows raised. "I give him space every night he doesn't come home for dinner." Sophie chuckled awkwardly, sipping her lemonade. "No, I mean emotional space. Maybe he just needs to breathe a little." Later that evening, Alana confronted Ryan. "Do you think I smother you?" she asked, standing at the doorway while he unbuttoned his shirt. He glanced at her through the mirror. "Where's this coming from?" She shrugged. "Sophie mentioned you seem stressed. That I should give you space." Ryan scoffed. "Sophie talks too much." But he didn't deny it. Elena crossed her arms. "She seems to have a lot of opinions about our marriage for someone who just got here." Ryan looked her way. "Maybe because she sees things you're too close to notice." The words hit like a slap. He turned back to the mirror as if he hadn't just taken her heart and pressed it into silence. Elena walked away slowly, her feet heavy. That night, as Sophie laughed downstairs at something on TV, Elena stared at the ceiling and realized her own house had begun to feel foreign, like she no longer belonged in the space she built. Elena stood in front of the mirror, carefully smoothing down the red silk dress she had chosen just for tonight. The dress held memories. Memories of a simpler time when Ryan couldn't keep his eyes off her, when he used to say red made her look like fire and passion combined. On the table downstairs, the candles were lit. Dinner was plated. A small chocolate cake waited beside a card she had written with trembling hope. 8 years, and still choosing you. The clock struck 8 p.m., and then 9:15, and then 10:02. Ryan didn't call, he didn't text. His seat at the table remained empty, mocking her with every flicker of candlelight. Elena blew out the flames one by one, her hands trembling, not with rage, but with humiliation. By midnight, she had peeled off the dress and sat in the dark with her knees pulled to her chest, trying not to cry. Her phone buzzed finally, but it was Sophie. "Hey love, Ryan's working late. Don't wait up." Elena stared at the message. How would Sophie know that? And why was she the one texting? She typed a reply, deleted it, then turned her phone face down. When Ryan walked in at nearly 1 a.m., he didn't notice the untouched cake or the card still lying open. "You're up," he said, loosening his tie. Elena stood up slowly. "Did you forget what today is?" Ryan frowned. "Tuesday," she swallowed hard. "It's our wedding anniversary." He stared for a second, blinked, then said, "I'll make it up to you," as if he had missed a dinner reservation, not 8 years of their life together. Elena didn't respond. She just walked past him, up the stairs, feeling something quiet inside her begin to fold. The next morning, Ryan left a bouquet of lilies on the counter, her least favorite flower. Beside it was a note scribbled on printer paper. "Sorry about yesterday. Long day. Love you." Elena stared at it for a long moment before tossing it aside and pouring herself tea. The lilies sat untouched. She sat in silence until Sophie waltzed in, dressed in one of Elena's old cardigans. "He told me he forgot." "Men, huh?" she said with a chuckle, pouring herself coffee like she lived there. Elena didn't smile. "How did you know to text me last night?" Sophie shrugged. "He called, said you might be worried." Elena gave a slow nod. Something about that didn't sit right. That evening, Ryan came home early, wearing guilt like a jacket he couldn't remove. "Look, I know I've been off," he said as he walked into the kitchen. "Things at work have been intense, and I'm trying, Elena. I really am." She watched him speak, trying to see if his words came from regret or convenience. "Trying?" she echoed softly. "Because this feels like giving up." But slowly. He leaned against the counter. "Can we not do this tonight?" he sighed. "I'm exhausted." Elena stared at him, then walked away without another word. Upstairs, she sat by the window and watched the driveway. Sophie's car wasn't there. That was odd. She hadn't said she was going anywhere. Yet the unease brewing inside Elena was unmistakable. Something was off, and it wasn't just the marriage. It was the company they kept. Elena had always been careful with her jewelry, especially the gold chain bracelet that once belonged to her mother. It wasn't flashy or expensive, but it carried sentimental weight only she understood. When she opened her box that morning and found it missing, her heart sank. She turned the room inside out, searching every drawer, every purse, and even the laundry basket. Nothing. She combed through the kitchen, the hallway, the guest bathroom. Nothing. Panic gave way to confusion, and confusion slowly turned to suspicion. There was only one other person who had access to her room during the day. Elena walked toward the guest room, hesitant but resolute. Inside Sophie's room, everything was neatly arranged, except a jewelry pouch sitting half unzipped on the dresser. Elena opened it gently, and there it was, the gold bracelet tucked between a pair of earrings. Her hands trembled as she held it. Just then, Sophie walked in, halting in the doorway. "Looking for something?" she asked, too casually. Elena turned. "This was in your bag." Sophie blinked. "Oh, you must have left it on the bathroom counter. I assumed it was mine. We have such similar taste." Elena's face remained unreadable. "I've never taken it off outside this house." Sophie tilted her head. "Are you accusing me of something?" "No," Elena said slowly, slipping the bracelet back onto her wrist. "I'm just saying it knows who it belongs to." Sophie didn't respond. But for the first time since her return, the atmosphere between them turned unmistakably sharp. Elena left the room without another word, her mind swirling with new doubts she could no longer ignore. The tall iron gates of Margaret Ashford's estate opened slowly, revealing the ivy-covered mansion that always smelled faintly of wisdom and rosewood. Elena hadn't planned on visiting, but something in her spirit urged her to seek the one person who had always seen through smiles and silences. Margaret sat on the veranda in her wide-brimmed hat, sipping chamomile tea with the posture of a queen who had survived her own wars. "You look tired, darling," Margaret said, setting down her cup. Elena smiled faintly. "Marriage isn't the fairy tale you told me about when I was 10. Margaret gestured to the chair beside her. "I told you the fairy tales were a trap. I was hoping you'd listen better by 30. Elena chuckled, but it faded quickly. Her hands fidgeted, her eyes dimmed. Margaret studied her niece's face with surgical calm. "You came here for something," she said after a pause. Elena hesitated, then looked down. "Do you think someone could want you for something other than love?" Margaret raised a brow. "Always. Especially when there's something worth taking." Elena swallowed hard. "I don't think Ryan loves me anymore. And Sophie, she's everywhere." Margaret leaned in, her voice lower. "I've lived too long not to smell a setup when it's brewing. Has he touched your inheritance yet?" Elena shook her head. "No. But he keeps asking me to invest. To merge accounts. I've been stalling." Margaret sat back. "Don't stall. Protect. Move it. Rewrite everything. Don't wait for heartbreak to teach you foresight." Elena's chest tightened. "That feels dramatic." Margaret's eyes softened. "You think betrayal doesn't wear perfume and a smile? You think it walks in screaming?" She reached for Elena's hand. "It walks in wearing your best friend's shoes." The words sank deep. Elena left that afternoon with legal documents folded neatly in her purse, but still unopened. Elena sat at her desk that evening, her laptop open, bank statements pulled up on screen. Something about the pattern of withdrawals had begun to itch at her nerves. Every few days, large sums were moved out of their joint account, marked vaguely as business consulting, project prep, and third-party fees. The totals weren't devastating, but they were consistent and methodical. She clicked through 5 months of transactions, each one larger than the last. She grabbed her phone and dialed. "Ryan, did you authorize another $12,000 to Avant Strategies?" He sighed on the other end. "Yes, Elena. I told you I'm working on something big. I need the capital." She frowned. "What kind of project takes this much money and doesn't have a name?" His tone sharpened. "Why are you checking on me now? Don't you trust me?" The question hung heavy. Elena closed her laptop gently. "I trusted you. That's why we opened the account together." Ryan's silence spoke volumes. Finally, he said, "Just stay in your lane, Elena. You've never cared about numbers before." She bit her tongue. "I care about patterns." and something about this doesn't feel right. He hung up without a goodbye. Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the banking app. Minutes later, she heard the front door open. Ryan stepped in, looking tired but smug. "You're becoming paranoid," he said, walking past her. "That's not attractive." Elena followed him with her eyes, but didn't respond. Instead, she opened a new browser window. Searched the company name. No website. No digital footprint. Her gut twisted. Ryan wasn't just keeping secrets. He was hiding something. And she was beginning to fear it had nothing to do with work. When Elena received the formal invitation to speak at the Global Interior Design Conference in Paris, she almost declined. It had arrived with flattering words. Her work was gaining quiet admiration in industry circles, but she wasn't in the emotional state to travel. Yet when she mentioned it at dinner that night, Ryan's eyes lit up. "You should go," he said quickly, too quickly. "You've been cooped up for too long. A break will do you good." Elena blinked. "I haven't even accepted yet." Sophie, who had joined them for dinner uninvited, chimed in with a grin. "Paris is a dream. I went last year. You should totally take it. Besides, Ryan and I can hold the fort here." Elena turned sharply toward her. "It's not a fort, it's my home." Sophie only sipped her wine and smiled. That night, Elena lay in bed replaying the conversation. Ryan had seemed almost relieved at the idea of her leaving. He hadn't once asked how long she'd be gone, or if she needed help preparing. That's what stayed with her, the lack of hesitation. Something about his eagerness unsettled her. The following morning, he was already researching flights, offering to cover some expenses. "You deserve to be celebrated," he said, his hand briefly brushing her shoulder. She nodded numbly, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "Do you want me gone, Ryan?" she asked quietly. He looked up, startled. "What kind of question is that?" But the way he didn't answer said more than words ever could. Elena accepted the invitation, but in her heart, a new doubt had taken root. She wasn't just going to Paris. She was stepping away, if only to see what bloomed in her absence. Elena stood in the check-in queue at the international terminal, her passport clutched in one hand and her boarding pass in the other. The soft murmurs of travelers around her felt like white noise, a gentle hum against the storm swirling in her mind. Her suitcase stood beside her like a silent accomplice, and for the first time in years she was alone, no Ryan, no Sophie, no familiar walls or routines. She tried to feel excited about Paris, about the honor, about what this meant for her career. But her heart felt strangely detached. As the line moved forward, she stepped out of it and walked toward the window. Planes lifted into the sky beyond the glass, going somewhere free. She pressed her hand against her chest and felt a hollow thud. The doubt wasn't leaving, it was growing. She walked to a quiet corner and sat down, trying to collect herself. Her breathing grew shallow. Why did this trip feel like exile instead of adventure? She remembered Ryan's voice, too eager. Sophie's laugh over wine, the sudden warmth between them, and her bracelet, and the bank statements, and the missing anniversary. Her mind raced until her fingers trembled. She looked down at her phone and stared at the departure time. Then she stood up, pulled out her phone, and made a single call to the airline. "I need to cancel my flight," she said softly. The agent asked why. Personal reasons. When she ended the call, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She wasn't ready to leave. She needed to see something, feel something, prove something to herself, not to them. Then she grabbed her bag and walked straight out of the terminal, past the waiting taxis, into a truth she hadn't yet imagined waiting at home. The moment Elena's car pulled up to the front of the house, something felt off. The gate, usually closed by default, was wide open. She slowed to a crawl, frowning. The hedges were lit up with fairy lights she hadn't approved. There were cars, too many of them, lining the driveway and street. As she parked, soft music floated through the air, the kind you'd expect at a summer wedding or a garden party. Elena stepped out slowly, her heels crunching gravel. Her home looked staged, decorated. Her heart began to pound as she moved toward the side gate, avoiding the main entrance. The backyard came into full view, and her stomach dropped. White chairs were neatly arranged in rows, facing an arch decorated with fresh blooms. Guests in pastel colors mingled with champagne flutes in hand. She spotted familiar faces, co-workers, neighbors, even one of Ryan's business partners. None of them had mentioned anything. No invitations, no messages. The music swelled slightly, and someone near her whispered, "It's about to start." She ducked behind a pillar and peered around the corner. That's when she saw Sophie at the far end of the aisle, in a white lace gown, laughing gently as a stylist fluffed her curls. Elena's body turned cold. Her mind spun, unable to process what her eyes were registering. Her fingers trembled as she gripped her phone, then slowly lowered it again. She didn't want a photo. She didn't need proof. Her entire body was the evidence. Whatever was happening here, it was more than betrayal. It was war. Elena crept along the edge of the veranda, unnoticed beneath the gentle chatter of the crowd and the instrumental version of "Can't Help Falling in Love," playing through the garden speakers. Her breath caught when she saw Ryan appear from inside the house, dressed in a sharp tuxedo, calm as ever. He adjusted his cufflinks and walked toward the front, where the makeshift altar stood. Guests turned in their chairs, some raising phones. And then Sophie appeared from behind the hedge, holding a bouquet of lilies. The same ones Ryan once claimed reminded him of Elena. The moment felt unreal, a fever dream pulled from the cruelest corner of her mind. Elena stood frozen, eyes locked on her husband's face. He was smiling. She backed away slowly, heart pounding, desperate to make sense of what she had walked into. Just then a neighbor turned and gasped. "Elena?" The name echoed louder than thunder. Heads turned. Sophie's smile faltered. Ryan's eyes met hers across the sea of chairs, and his expression didn't shift. No panic, no guilt, only stillness. Elena's legs buckled beneath her, and the world tilted. She collapsed to the grass as people rushed toward her. Murmurs turned to gasps. Someone screamed for water. But Elena heard nothing, only the music continuing, as if the world had chosen to ignore her entirely. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was Ryan reaching for Sophie's hand, pulling her gently aside as if nothing had happened, as if the woman lying in the dirt had never existed. The next morning, Elena woke with the strange weight of unreality pressing against her chest. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a brief second, she didn't know where she was. It wasn't her room, it was too clean, too sterile. A dull ache throbbed behind her eyes. Then she saw the IV drip, the soft beeping of the machine beside her, and the nurse at the corner adjusting something on a chart. "You're awake," the nurse said gently. "You fainted at an event yesterday. You were brought in by someone from the crowd." Elena tried to sit up, but her body felt as though it had been hollowed out. Her mind flickered back, music, lace, Sophie in white, Ryan standing with her like nothing had ever mattered before. Her throat tightened. "What day is it?" she asked. "Sunday morning," the nurse replied. Elena leaned her head back on the pillow, stunned. She had only been gone one day. Just one day, and everything had been rewritten in her absence. By the time she was discharged, the damage had already bloomed. News of the backyard wedding had circulated among her social circles. No one called to check on her, not even her neighbors. Only one person had texted Aunt Margaret, whose message simply read, "Come when you're ready, but come strong." Elena returned home late that evening. The decorations were gone, the lights dismantled, but her heart felt stripped bare. The living room was empty except for a suitcase in the corner, hers. On the coffee table lay a piece of paper, carefully folded. Ryan's handwriting. "Let's talk when you're calm. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." No apology, no explanation. Just condescension dressed in ink. Elena stood there for a long time, staring at the note. Then she went upstairs and changed the locks on every door in the house except one. The one she intended to leave open long enough for the truth to walk in on its own. The following morning was eerily quiet, but not peaceful. Elena walked through the house barefoot, the floors cold beneath her. The flowers Ryan had left on the dining table days ago had withered, petals curling inward like secrets. She moved from room to room, noting the faint scent of Sophie's perfume still lingering in the guest bathroom. As she reached the bedroom, she noticed her suitcase still packed from the canceled flight. She hadn't even opened it. She sat beside it, gently pulling down the zipper. Inside were clothes she'd planned to wear in Paris, shoes she bought for the gala, and a sealed envelope with her speech notes. It hit her then, how everything she had prepared for Everything she had hoped to celebrate had been quietly replaced with shame. She hadn't just canceled a flight, she had canceled the last illusion of safety. Ryan didn't come home that day. Elena called no one. The doorbell rang once, and when she peered through the peephole, it was Sophie, holding what looked like a cake box. Elena didn't open the door. She watched her friend place the box down, check her phone, then walk away with a satisfied smirk. When the coast was clear, Elena retrieved the box. Inside was a white cake with cursive letters piped in gold. To new beginnings. Her hands trembled. The audacity wasn't just cruel, it was theatrical. She tossed it into the bin. That evening, as twilight fell and the house sank into quiet shadow, she sat on the edge of the bed and whispered aloud to herself, "They want me to break." But even as her voice cracked, her eyes held steady. She wasn't broken. She was angry, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what she would find if she looked deeper. Elena didn't expect answers, but she needed to start asking questions. She began with their inner circle, friends she thought she trusted. She texted Marianne, an old college friend who had been at the gathering. "Did you know about the wedding?" Elena asked bluntly. Marianne took 2 hours to respond. "I thought it was a renewal of vows." "Ryan told everyone you were out of the country and approved it." The words punched her. Approved it. Elena sat back, stunned. Another message came in. "I wouldn't have come if I knew. I swear." The lies had gone farther than she imagined. She pulled up Ryan's call history from their home account, then searched the calendar. There were blocked-out days with no labels, weeks that now aligned with the money transfers. The web was beginning to unravel. She wasn't just being edged out, she had been strategically erased. Later that evening, Ryan walked through the door, calm as ever, holding takeout. "You're home," he said casually. Elena sat at the dining table with her arms crossed. "I canceled my flight, walked in on a wedding. Do you remember that?" Ryan's face didn't change. "Elena, it was a symbolic event. A message. You're the one who's been avoiding the inevitable." She blinked. "So your answer to a failing marriage was staging a wedding with my best friend while I was packing." He placed the takeout down and sighed. "I needed to push you. You've been dragging this out." She stared at him. "And Sophie? She just volunteered to humiliate me?" Ryan looked away. "She understands me." Elena rose to her feet, voice trembling. "You don't get to build closure on top of betrayal." He turned to leave the room. "Think whatever you want, Elena, but we both know you'll sign those papers soon." His words stayed in the air long after he was gone, but this time they didn't bruise. They burned. It happened by accident. Elena had gone downstairs to charge her dying phone, and out of habit used the shared tablet Ryan usually left in the kitchen. She plugged in her device and noticed the tablet screen glowing faintly, unlocked. Curious, she tapped to close the browser, but paused when she noticed the green WhatsApp icon blinking. Her finger hovered for a moment before instinct overruled politeness. The account was already logged in. She opened the chat list and saw Sophie's name at the very top, with dozens of unread messages. Her heart thudded. She tapped. And then everything she thought she knew collapsed in on itself. Messages from weeks, even months ago, filled the screen. Photos of rings, dress options, and messages like, "She's clueless, I swear." Then another. "The moment she signs, we're set for life." Elena scrolled, hands trembling. "Push harder. She's almost there. Once she sees us together, her pride will handle the rest. She'll crack. She always does." The final blow came from Ryan. "This isn't love, Soph. This is leverage. After this, we never have to worry about money again." Elena dropped the tablet like it burned. Her vision blurred, but she didn't cry. The betrayal wasn't raw anymore. It was surgical, calculated, and poisonous. She sat back, stunned, the words echoing in her head like church bells tolling for a funeral. He had used her. They both had. And they thought she'd be too naive to notice, too weak to fight back. But they had made one miscalculation. Elena had never needed to scream to be dangerous. She stood up, walked to the sink, and splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection was pale, but her eyes? Cold steel. Sleep didn't come that night. Elena sat on the floor of her room, the tablet beside her, still open to the conversation that shattered whatever remnants of trust had remained. The sentences burned into her memory. "She'll break. She'll give up. Make it painful." She signs faster when she feels humiliated. There was no remorse, no hesitation, just strategy. She thought of every conversation, every subtle manipulation, every time Sophie had comforted her while plotting to steal everything she had. Elena's hands curled into fists. This wasn't betrayal by accident, it was betrayal rehearsed, deliberate, cold-blooded. And suddenly, Elena realized that the marriage wasn't falling apart. It had been pulled apart thread by thread while she slept beside a man she no longer recognized. In the morning, Ryan entered the kitchen like he hadn't torn her world apart. "I'll have my lawyer drop off the papers next week," he said coolly, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. "You'll feel better once it's all done." Elena looked up from her chair, face unreadable. "Do you think I'm stupid?" she asked quietly. Ryan frowned, then forced a laugh. "Elena, don't be dramatic. This is just the end of a marriage. Not a crime scene." She said nothing. Just watched him drink, watched his confidence settle back into place. And in that silence, something powerful began to bloom inside her, an unfamiliar calm born from clarity. He thought he was ahead. He thought this was his victory lap. But he had no idea she already knew. And while he plotted her downfall with Sophie, Elena had begun plotting something else, quiet, methodical, and irreversible. Elena drove across town to a private cafe tucked between two old bookstores, the kind of place no one would expect to find her on a weekday. She brought with her a leather folder and a mind sharpened by heartbreak. Her lawyer, a discreet woman named Linda Cole, arrived promptly and slid into the booth across from her. "You finally ready to talk numbers?" Linda asked gently. Elena nodded. "Yes, but not for the reason you think." She handed Linda the tablet. "I want to move everything out of my name. Immediately." Linda blinked. "Wait, you're transferring your assets?" Elena met her gaze. "Every house, account, bond, title deed. Lock it down in a trust. Change the will. I want to disappear from my own paperwork." Linda hesitated. "That's drastic." Elena leaned forward. "So is orchestrating a wedding with your wife's best friend to steal her inheritance." As they discussed logistics, Elena felt the first flutter of control return to her chest. Everything Ryan believed he was entitled to would vanish before his eyes. Every silent humiliation she had endured, every night of doubt, would be repaid without a single raised voice. "Make it irrevocable," she added firmly. "Even if I change my mind, I won't be able to access it without the trust's terms." Linda took notes. "That's serious protection. But if you do this, you'll be left with nothing in your name." Elena's voice didn't falter. "That's exactly what I want him to see when the time comes. Nothing." She folded her hands calmly. "And the best part? After 7 years of marriage, I'll be legally entitled to half of everything he owns." Linda's eyes widened. "He'll never see it coming." Elena smiled faintly. "No, he won't, but that's the point." Aunt Margaret arrived unannounced just as the afternoon light began to fade. Elena heard the sharp knock on the front door and opened it to find her aunt, dressed in her usual crisp navy blouse and pearl earrings, standing with a gaze that saw through every crack. "You've gone quiet," Margaret said, stepping inside. "And when my niece goes quiet, it means she's preparing a war." Elena managed a tired smile and gestured toward the sitting room. Margaret took a seat and placed a thin folder on the coffee table. "I brought the final draft of the trust," she said softly. "I added a few protective clauses, just in case he thinks of contesting it." Elena nodded, her voice barely audible. "He's going to find out eventually." Margaret's eyes glinted. "Let him. What matters is, by the time he opens the box, the gift's already been removed." They sat in silence for a moment before Elena spoke again. "Do you ever wonder why it's always the people closest to us who cut the deepest?" Margaret took a slow sip of tea before replying, "Because strangers need knives. Familiar ones only need proximity." Elena blinked back the sting in her eyes. "I trusted them both, blindly." Margaret reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You trusted because you're decent. Don't let their deceit rewrite your goodness." Elena exhaled. "The documents are ready. The assets are gone. I just have to sign those divorce papers when he brings them." Margaret stood. "And when he does, smile. Let him believe he's won. There's a special kind of justice in silence when it's paired with preparation." Elena watched her aunt leave with the calm of someone who had survived her own betrayal decades earlier. The storm was coming, but Elena had already begun building her shelter. The office smelled faintly of oak and fresh ink, a quiet kind of power embedded in every shelf and glass wall. Elena sat across from Linda Cole, watching her flip through a set of legal documents with surgical precision. All holdings, Linda confirmed, have now been moved to the Ashford Trust. That includes the 2 properties in Lagos, the mutual funds, and the company shares. As of today, you legally own nothing. Elena felt a strange mix of vulnerability and triumph. That's exactly what I wanted, she said. Linda studied her. This is clean. Untouchable. Even if Ryan hires a bloodhound, there's no trail leading back to you. Elena nodded. He thinks he's manipulating me into giving him half. He doesn't know I already gave it all away. Linda leaned back in her chair, her voice low and steady. Just to confirm, if something happens to you, everything goes to the trust's beneficiary. Elena nodded. Yes. Margaret will hold the key until I choose the next chapter. Linda raised an eyebrow. And when Ryan finds out you've signed with empty hands? Elena smiled faintly. He'll believe he won. That's the trick. People who feel victorious rarely look deeper. Linda let out a low whistle. You've got nerves of steel, Elena. But Elena shook her head. Not steel, just scars. As the final signature dried on the page, she stood up and gathered her things. Now we wait, she said. Let them bring the papers. Let them think it's over. As she walked out of the firm, the wind brushed her face gently, like a whisper of vindication. The game had changed, and now Elena was playing by her own rules. 2 days later, Elena met Margaret again, this time at her estate, inside a quiet study that smelled of old books and lavender oil. The will was open on the desk, fresh ink marking a lifetime's worth of decisions. You're sure about this? Margaret asked, her pen poised. Absolutely, Elena said. If anything happens to me, I don't want Ryan or Sophie getting a cent. Margaret made the final strokes, then closed the file. Your fortune now lives in shadows they can't reach. Elena sat back and exhaled. It feels strange to be so rich and yet appear so empty. Margaret looked at her gently. Appearances are weapons. Let them underestimate you. The document was slipped into a safe behind a painting. No drama, no finality, just quiet preparation. That evening, Elena sat alone by the fireplace, her phone buzzing with texts from Ryan. Let's not drag this. I've sent the papers. Sign them and be free. She didn't respond. Instead, she stared into the flames, feeling both weightless and armored. Her phone buzzed again, this time from Sophie. I hope we can move forward with dignity. It's not about winning. It's about peace. Elena scoffed quietly. Peace had never been their intention. But she had learned something important through all of this. The most dangerous person in a room isn't the one shouting. It's the one preparing. She closed her phone and whispered, You'll have your papers, but you'll never have me. The will was done. The assets gone. Her name erased from every ledger. All that remained was the signature and the silence that would follow. When Ryan arrived at the house with the divorce papers in a leather-bound folder, he carried the self-satisfaction of a man convinced he'd orchestrated the perfect ending. Elena was sitting in the sunroom, sipping tea, her face unreadable. Everything's in order, he said, placing the folder on the glass table between them. You'll find the terms are fair. Elena looked down at the stack without reaching for it. You seem very sure of yourself, she said calmly. Ryan chuckled. You've been dragging this out. Let's not complicate it any further. Once this is signed, we can both move on. His eyes flickered with restrained excitement. You'll be free, Elena. Isn't that what you want? She studied his face for a long time, then gave a small nod. Freedom always sounds better coming from the mouth of someone who thinks they're winning. Without asking for a pen, she flipped to the last page and signed. No hesitation, no theatrics. Ryan blinked, visibly surprised. That's it, he asked. Elena slid the folder back toward him. That's it, she said softly. Was there supposed to be more? He shook his head, though the ease with which she agreed unsettled him. No, I thought you might have something to say. She stood. You stopped listening a long time ago, Ryan. I've learned not to waste my breath. He watched her as she walked away, graceful, composed, untouched. The Elena he expected to fall apart had never shown up, and though he couldn't explain it, a strange discomfort began to creep in. But he pushed it aside. She had signed. And now, finally, the future he had schemed for was within reach. Ryan threw the party 3 days later in a rented penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Champagne flowed, music pulsed, and every guest present had either turned a blind eye or eagerly watched the scandal unfold. Sophie floated through the room in a champagne-colored dress, her hand constantly brushing Ryan's arm. "We did it," she whispered in his ear as they clinked glasses. She signed, "No lawyers, no fight, no mess." Ryan grinned, pulling her closer. "I told you she'd fold. She's soft. Always has been." The guests laughed and toasted to new chapters, oblivious to the ticking bomb buried beneath the surface of their triumph. Someone asked about the inheritance, and Ryan puffed out his chest. She had millions just sitting there. And now, half is mine, officially. As the evening wore on, the room swelled with confidence and the illusion of victory. Sophie leaned in against the balcony, watching the lights below. "What are you going to do with your half?" she teased. Ryan smirked. "Start a firm, maybe buy a place in Spain. I've earned this." He said it with such conviction, such pride, that even she began to believe it. But underneath her smile, a flicker of worry surfaced. Elena had been too quiet, too graceful. And in Sophie's experience, women who don't scream often strike hardest. "You're sure everything's clear?" she asked. Ryan brushed her concern away. "She's got nothing left, trust me." Neither of them noticed the man in a charcoal suit stepping out of the elevator downstairs, the lawyer carrying documents that would turn their entire celebration into ashes by morning. The next morning, Ryan sat on his balcony with a cup of coffee and his phone in hand, expecting a call from the inheritance attorney confirming transfer access. Instead, when the phone rang, the tone on the other end was clipped. "Mr. Monroe, we've reviewed the estate documentation, and there's nothing to transfer to you." Ryan sat up straight. "What do you mean?" The voice remained steady. "All assets previously held by Mrs. Elena Monroe were legally moved to a protected trust weeks ago. The trust is closed, irrevocable. As it stands, she holds no inheritable or divisible wealth." Ryan froze. "That's not possible. We were married 7 years. I'm entitled to my share." The attorney paused. "Correct. You're entitled to half of what's hers. But at the time of divorce, she owned nothing." Ryan's voice cracked. "She tricked me." The attorney didn't respond. "Is there anything else?" he asked coldly. Ryan ended the call and dropped the phone to the floor. Sophie, who had overheard part of the conversation, stepped onto the balcony, her eyes wide. What did they say? He couldn't answer at first. When he finally met her gaze, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She signed over everything to someone else." Sophie blinked. "So we get nothing," Ryan laughed bitterly. "Worse, we gave her everything, and she gave us the illusion we were winning." Silence settled between them like a verdict. In that moment, the celebration they had hosted became nothing more than a wake for a fortune they would never touch, and a woman they had underestimated until it was too late. Ryan barely slept that night. The sun rose over a quiet house, but inside, chaos churned in his chest. He called his lawyer before the clock struck 8. "We have to do something," he demanded. "She played me. She's hiding the money." But the lawyer's voice on the other end remained calm. "Ryan, you need to understand. You weren't tricked. You simply didn't pay attention. Elena moved her assets before the divorce, legally and cleanly. But since you were married for over 7 years, she is now entitled to half of everything under your name." Ryan shot up from the chair. "What are you talking about?" "That's not how this works," the lawyer sighed. "That's exactly how it works, and she's already filed a claim. You'll be receiving a court notice by the end of the week." Staggering into the kitchen, Ryan poured himself a glass of whiskey. It was barely 9 a.m., but the panic was already flooding his bloodstream. Sophie walked in, hair messy from sleep, and frowned. "What's going on now?" He looked at her with eyes that no longer held confidence, only disbelief. "She didn't just take her money away. She's coming for mine." Sophie blinked. "She can't do that." He laughed, hollow and bitter. "She already did, and it's legal. She's going to take half of my company, my properties, my accounts." Sophie grabbed the counter. "But we planned everything. You said she'd crumble. You said we'd be rich." Ryan rubbed his temple. "She didn't crumble. She calculated." And for the first time since their scheme began, He realized the chessboard had always been hers, and they'd only ever been moving pieces. Sophie paced the living room in a fury, her robe flaring behind her with each step. "This is insane," she snapped. "She played you like a puppet, and now we're the ones with nothing. How could you let that happen?" Ryan sat on the edge of the couch, head in his hands. "I didn't let anything happen. I underestimated her. We both did." Sophie stopped in front of him, voice sharp. "No, you promised me. You said she was fragile. Passive. You told me she'd sign without question and walk away in pieces. You swore we'd be set for life." Ryan looked up at her, weary. "And you were eager enough to believe it. Don't act like you didn't enjoy this more than I did." Her face flushed with rage. "Don't you dare blame this on me. You're the one who married her. You're the one who started this plan." Their shouting escalated until silence finally fell between them like a curtain. Sophie's expression shifted from anger to something colder, resentment. "You ruined everything," she said. "We had one job, get her to sign and collect the reward. But instead, you handed her the only leverage she needed." Ryan stood, exasperated. "I gave up years of my life for this. Don't pretend you were some bystander. You pushed me into this just as much as I pulled you." Sophie's voice cracked, raw and venomous. "And you think that justifies anything? You think I want to be the woman who stole a marriage and got nothing in return?" Ryan's jaw clenched. "Then maybe you shouldn't have worn white to a fake wedding." The words hung between them like smoke. For the first time, Sophie realized they weren't partners anymore. They were two broken players who had bet against the wrong opponent and lost. Elena stood outside the old house, the one she had once decorated with care, planting jasmine by the porch and choosing curtains to match the morning light. She didn't flinch as she placed the front door key into an envelope and slid it through the mail slot. It wasn't home anymore. It was a monument to betrayal. She stepped back, hands steady, heart surprisingly light. The silence behind her was different now. It was peace, not loneliness. A black town car waited by the curb. She got in, exhaling as the driver pulled away. She didn't look back. There was nothing in that house that belonged to her anymore. Not the furniture, not the memories, not even the name etched on the mailbox. Later that afternoon, she visited her new apartment, a sleek sunlit space overlooking a quiet street. Margaret had helped her secure it under a different trust name. No one would know where she lived unless she wanted them to. She stood by the window with a cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. The woman she had been weeks ago, the one who begged for clarity, who hoped for apologies, was gone. She no longer needed explanations or closure. She had written her own ending. Her phone buzzed once, an email confirmation from the court. The divorce was officially processed. Elena read it, smiled faintly, and powered off her phone. No public statement, no revenge post. Just quiet departure. She had been their victim once. But now, she was simply free. The late afternoon sun bathed the garden in gold as Elena walked up the stone path toward Aunt Margaret's estate. It had been weeks since they'd seen each other in person, though they had exchanged a few brief emails confirming everything was settled. Margaret was already on the veranda, a porcelain teapot beside her and that familiar half-smile playing on her lips. "You look lighter," she said, gesturing for Elena to sit. Elena folded into the chair with a sigh of quiet satisfaction. Lighter, maybe. Wiser, definitely. Margaret poured the tea. Wounds have a way of revealing wisdom when they stop bleeding. Elena took a sip and looked out toward the hedge maze at the edge of the garden. "He hasn't called since the court papers landed." Margaret chuckled. "He won't. He's too humiliated. Predators don't chase what they fear." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Margaret leaned in, her voice softer. "You played it well. But more than that, you reclaimed something no one saw coming." Elena looked at her, puzzled. "What's that?" Margaret touched her hand gently. "Your name, not the one on the trust. The one people forgot mattered." Elena swallowed hard. "I thought I'd feel vindicated when it ended. But I just feel clear. Not triumphant, not bitter, just done." Margaret nodded knowingly. "That's because you never wanted revenge. You wanted peace, and peace is never loud." Elena exhaled deeply. "You were right. Quiet power cuts the deepest." Margaret's eyes gleamed. "And it leaves the cleanest wound." They clinked teacups in a wordless toast to endurance, to grace, and to the kind of strength that never demands the spotlight. Elena didn't just survive the fire. She walked out of it refined, not ruined. The gallery opening was intimate but elegant, exactly the kind of event Elena would have once declined for fear of attention. But tonight, she stood under soft lights in a floor-length emerald dress, surrounded by clients who spoke of her work with admiration, not curiosity. The whispers that once followed her of betrayal, scandal, and heartbreak had faded into silence. Not because people had forgotten, but because Elena had chosen not to give them anything else to gossip about. She had started a small interior design firm under her mother's maiden name, quietly, steadily, and it had begun to thrive. As she moved through the room, accepting compliments with polite nods, her eyes were calm, her presence unshaken. She had finally stepped out of the shadows of someone else's ambition. Later, she stood alone on the balcony, watching the city glitter beneath her. A young couple passed behind her, laughing softly, the woman whispering, "That's the designer, the one with the eyes that say she's lived 1,000 lives." Elena smiled faintly to herself. Her phone vibrated in her clutch, one missed call from an unknown number. She didn't need to check who it was. Some things didn't deserve her attention anymore. She slipped the phone away and took a deep breath. The past had ended, not with screams, not with court battles, but with the quiet signature of a woman who learned to walk away before she was dragged under. Elena Monroe was no longer the woman who had everything to lose. She was the woman who had lost it all and found herself instead. And now every step forward belonged only to her. The end, here's the Bible verse, Proverbs 19, verse 21 NIV. "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." This verse reflects how Ryan and Sophie plotted carefully to manipulate and destroy Elena for selfish gain. Yet despite their schemes, it was Elena's integrity, patience, and quiet strength, guided by wisdom and truth, that ultimately triumphed. No matter how calculated human betrayal may be, divine justice always finds its way. Moral of the story: true power does not come from noise, manipulation, or deceit. It comes from clarity, self-respect, and quiet wisdom. Those who underestimate the silent strength of the betrayed often find themselves undone by their own arrogance. Never seek revenge through chaos. Sometimes, the greatest response is silent preparation and graceful departure. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much.